I'm going to do this first session together with Professor Ambrose Isah. You must have met him also yesterday, because he is actually the person who has been driving the whole project, developing pharmacovigilance indicators on behalf of WHO. So it's really a privilege to have him here. And since he is here, we will try to use his expertise and knowledge in this particular field. So we are going to have a bit of a dialogue. It is perhaps a bit strange to talk about pharmacovigilance indicators, the WHO pharmacovigilance indicators that are still not available publicly. We are expecting them to appear on the WHO website any day. I don't know, Daisuke, if you have any information on that is likely to happen. But I know it's Shanti Pal who is now making sure that we come to the end point where they will be public, and it will happen very, very soon. But it's been a very long process, which I will talk about to some extent. So what do we mean by indicators in general? And this is a commonly used definition. They are objective measures that allow an evaluation of baseline situation and progress in healthcare services and interventions. Right? And I think it will become clear as we progress through this session. Why do we need pharmacovigilance indicators? Well, we can measure where we are. We can measure the status of the pharmacovigilance system. That's the intention with these indicators. And we are able to identify strengths, weaknesses, achievements, growth, and impact if we follow the indicator values over time. And then also we can have some indication of what has been the return on investment that we have made in pharmacovigilance. Has it paid off? The requirements that we have set to ourselves when defining these indicators is that they should be simple. They shouldn't be too complicated. Some of them are a bit complicated, but for good reasons. And they should be easy to measure and interpret. And of course, that means that whoever records the indicator will come to the same result. That's the idea. They should be reproducible, so that independent of the investigator, it will still be robust. And it should be sensitive to detect problems. If you have indicators that are on a very high level, they will not quite tell you what the problem might be on a lower level. And they should be applicable to any facility engaged in pharmacovigilance. So it's not just indicators for a national pharmacovigilance system. If you go to a big hospital, for example, you should be able to apply these indicators to find out how are they doing in pharmacovigilance in this health facility. They should be applicable also in that situation. I would like to say, when it comes to sensitivity and the level of indicators, that WHO is working with 3 levels of indicators, level 1, 2, and 3. And the first level, they are very general. And what we are working with here is level 3 indicators. They are quite detailed. And that is one of the reasons why it's taken quite a long time to develop the indicators to the final publication, because they have to be aligned with all the other indicators that are there in WHO. You have indicators, special indicators for vaccines, for example, vaccine safety monitoring. And these have to fit in with those sets of indicators. And that takes a little bit of time and coordination. The classification of the indicators that we are talking about now, first we have some background information about a country, like demographics, the economic situation, healthcare system, how that works, and the pharmaceutical scenario, how many medicines are there on the market, and so on. And then we have divided the indicators into structure indicators, and please note that they are qualitative. It's just the answer is yes or no. It's present or absent. No figures. Then you have process indicators and output and impact indicators, and they are quantitative. And then we have also developed some specific indicators for public health programs. Right? And just a few words about the development process. The idea of creating these indicators arose at the pharmacovigilance consultants meetings in, I think it was in Ghana in 2007, where we were talking about how can we develop pharmacovigilance in the various African countries. And then the idea came up that if we engage in interventions, we have to have a way of measuring the impact, how we are making progress. And that's where the idea of indicators came up. And that was then brought to a working group of the 2008 annual meeting of national centers in the WHO drug monitoring program. And that meeting took place here in Uppsala in the conference and concert hall. And Professor Ambrose, Isah, he was leading that working group. He was chairing it. And since then, he's been stuck with the issue. But he has also taken some support from me and from Shantipal at WHO headquarters, and Serge Zuref, who worked at headquarters at one point. He also contributed. And it has also gone to the meeting of national centers. We had a special session on the indicators in 2009 in Morocco. And so there has been a consultation process throughout. Comments and prioritization have been made by the national centers. So it's not something that we, the 3 or 4 of us, have figured out by ourselves. It's actually been supported and decided by the national centers at that time. And ACSOMP, I don't know if you have heard of that committee yet. It's the WHO Advisory Committee on Safety of Medicinal Products. They meet once a year in Geneva, and they have also considered these indicators on 3 different occasions. And in 2013, they said, good enough, just publish them. And then that led to this coordination process within WHO. But now these indicators have been signed off by the Assistant Director General, and they will be published very soon. Right. And now comes the hierarchy. Because we have quite a high number of indicators, but they don't have the same status. We have selected 27 core indicators, and they are divided into 10 structural, 9 process, and 8 outcome impact indicators. So you can decide to use only these core indicators, but then we have also developed some complementary indicators, and there are 36 of them, 11 structural, 13 process, and 12 outcome impact. So that's the full set. And then to start with the structural indicators, what are they intended to show? Well, they are there to show the visibility of the pharmacovigilance program? How prominent is it? Is it just a very tiny operation, or is it a full-blown national program? What is the enabled environment in which you're operating? The legal framework for operations is very important. And how sustainable is it? Do you have proper structures in place so that you can plan properly and know that it will live on for a long period of time? So here is the core structural indicators. They are not fully worded the way they are in the document. This is an abbreviated list. But the obvious first question is there a pharmacovigilance center in this setting with a standard accommodation? Do they have an office, a place to operate from? Is there a statutory provision for pharmacovigilance? That is the pharmacovigilance center backed up by some kind of policy document, regulatory requirement, or is it completely voluntary? And you will be surprised that if you look around the world, very many of the national programs have operated on a voluntary basis, no legal background. But that is changing, and is changing quite rapidly. And there is also a need for this question: is there a drug regulatory authority or agency? And in some countries, unfortunately, you're still forced to say no to that question. But if you have a statutory provision, which means that the politicians have said that pharmacovigilance should be carried out in this country, that is really not enough for success. You also need to have a regular financial provision for the Pharmacovigilance Center. Is there a budget? And that's something we will talk about in the next session as well, the funding situation. Do you have human resources to carry out the function of the center properly? And of course, this is a bit of a unclear word, properly. What does it mean? But of course, if you go to a hospital or if you go to a national system, it is a different issue, what is proper. It's also related to what's the ambitions, what the terms of reference of the pharmacovigilance system. Do you have a standard ADR reporting form, which is of course absolutely essential for running spontaneous reporting? And number 7 here is a process in place for collection, recording and analysis of ADR. So is there a full process for recording the data and also analyzing it? Is pharmacovigilance included in a national curriculum of schools for healthcare professionals? And I would say very many countries will have to say no to that one. Very few have really got to that stage, and that's something I feel is a major failure of pharmacovigilance systems in most countries. And it's also why it is so difficult for pharmacovigilance to take off, because it would be quite different if our doctors, pharmacists, nurses learned about pharmacovigilance in reporting already when being trained. But, well, I have my own theories of why that is the case, but it has to be improved. 9, is there a newsletter or information bulletin or website for pharmacovigilance information dissemination? We will hear a lot about communication during this training course, and obviously there is no point collecting data and analyzing data if we don't have a means of giving feedback and communicating to those who are reporting. So this is a very important structural indicator. And then a National Adverse Reaction or Pharmacovigilance Advisory Committee. Do you have that? Have you established such a committee? Also a very important indicator. I would like to invite you again, Ambrose, to comment on the value we are putting to the various indicators. Are they kind of assessed with the same weight?
Yeah, you won't say that, they are not the same essentially. And when assessing, well, one of the usefulness of the indicators is to enable you compare center to center. They enable you see what the trend is over time, in terms of the progress. They enable you get to a target and all that. And this is the next phase which we are going to in the course of development of the indicator. So you find that you have to, quantitate to some extent to give some relative importance to the whole indicators. Otherwise, it will be like just a qualitative, document. So you have to now impute values to the various indicators. And the values you impute should reflect their importance. And it should be such that those who are doing well will be rewarded, and those who are not doing well will be, sanctioned, so to say. So you find that for indicators that are very important, that determine maybe the visibility, strongly determine the visibility, the existence, and the sustenance should be given higher scores. So we have done that, though it's not yet in public domain. So you give a lot higher scores to that. And then in terms of the process, you find that, I'm sure he'll talk about the process indicators. Do you want me to address that after you've talked about the process indicators? I think that would so that they appreciate that better.
We can turn to them.
Yes, okay.
Because the process indicators are there to show the activities within the pharmacovigilance program and also to measure the dynamics, what is happening, and not just structures, what is in place, okay? What's happening within the structure. Right, and here are the core process indicators.
Yeah, well, very good. So, running down the process indicators, you can find that they are now talking about the total number of ADRO reports you received in the last calendar year, the total number of reports in the national local database, the percentage of total annual reports acknowledged. This tells you about the activities within the center. Are you just collecting a report and keeping them without giving a feedback, acknowledging them? Because you find that when you don't do that, people lose interest. They wonder what's happening to the report. So you should be able to do all that. And, going down, I'm sure maybe Ken might want to go through again, but the essence in terms of imputing scores to this, you have to look at what is happening, because these are the dynamics, these are the activities going on. And if you have a picture of the pharmacovigilance system, because that is what we're talking about now, the activities going on within that system is what is captured by the process indicators. So you want to see a center, for instance, where the total number of ADRO reports maybe is increasing or appropriate to the population. I'm sure when we talk, I will give one or two words about the background information, maybe towards the end, so that you can see how you can apply that to this. And then the total number of reports in the national database. I'm sure you see all this if you've been looking at some of the reports from the center and also with Vigilize and all that. So it's a very useful tool. So you find that you're able to impute scores to all this. If a center is not doing well, if a center is not getting reports and all that, it should be penalized. So we allot scores. I'm sure Sten will tell you that you expect about 200 reports from that's from a country
per million inhabitants per year.
Inhabitants per year. So if you use that as a target, you should be able to know whether the country, national center, is doing well or not. I think you continue, Sten. I will.
All right.
Get back at
Thank you very much for that. So we have moved on from the structure indicators to the process indicators, and Ambrose has already read out the first ones. So I think that's quite clear, and you realize that here we are moving from qualitative to quantitative indicators. We assign numbers, and we are clear also saying last calendar year. We are not just saying last year, so we are clear about it's from 1st of January to last of December. So we are always measuring the same calendar year. And this issue about acknowledgement is really critical, and also causality assessment in the year. Very many countries don't do that on the input side. If you have a very high number of case reports coming into you, it becomes not a high priority activity because it's quite time consuming. And then a lot of those case reports will not really lead to signals. So those countries with a lot of data coming in, they prefer to do causality assessment in connection with signal analysis. And then percentage of national reports satisfactorily completed and submitted to the national center. So if you are assessing a hospital or a health facility, you ask how much has been submitted to the central level. And it should basically be 100%, but there might be some issues there. The National Pharmacovigilance Center do not want to receive even. And then the central national level, you want to know how much, how many, what a percentage of your national ICSRs have been sent to WHO, right? And then we come to these special situation where we want to be able to record not only adverse drug reactions. I guess you have already gone through the definition of pharmacovigilance, that we refer to all other drug-related problems, not just adverse reactions. We want to also learn about therapeutic ineffectiveness and about medication errors. Right? And then we're also asking, to what extent have you been able to engage the pharmaceutical industry? So, percentage of registered marketing authorization holders are having a functional pharmacovigilance system. There is some flexibility here about what is functional, of course, but that has to be defined locally. There are expectations and rules, what is mandated for a pharmaceutical company to submit to the PV center. And of course this should preferably be close to 100%. And then we also want to know if the pharmacovigilance center and system has reached to a more advanced stage, being engaged not only in spontaneous reporting, but have they also done active surveillance activities? Are they initiated, ongoing, or completed in the last 5 years? Active surveillance might not be something that you do continuously. You might do it in connection with a certain product introduction. That's often when you use a cohort event monitoring, for example. Or if you're doing a targeted spontaneous reporting, you do it once you have identified a possible problem that you want to characterize. So it doesn't always go on continuously. But we want to know, do you have the knowledge? Do you have the capacity to engage in these kind of special studies? right? Those are the core process indicators. And note, I'm not going into the complementary indicators. They are there in the document. And finally, the outcome impact indicators. They are the most important, because this is really what we want to achieve. We want to have an effect on patient safety in society, and we want to achieve changes. So what changes and what effects have we been able to record? And primarily long-term, but also short-term, of course. And the outcome indicators, they are also and can be used as advocacy tools, because they can show the burden of drug-related harm in the healthcare system. And that is something we can use when trying to impress or tell our decision makers that, see here, what's the magnitude of this problem? We have to do something about it. And you can follow trend, and you can also, on the basis of these outcome and impact indicators, see what have we gained from the investment we have done in pharmacovigilance. So we come to some of the more difficult ones. The first one is number of signals identified by the pharmacovigilance centers in the last 5 years. And the second one is similar, not only signals, but regulatory actions taken in the last year based on national data. Not just because you have reacted on something that came from the US, from EMA, but something you have picked up from your own data. That's what we are trying to catch here. Right? Have you done labeling changes, safety warnings, suspension, withdrawal, or other restrictions? And many of the programs we have in our WHO pharmacovigilance system, they are not quite there yet. They primarily react on actions that are taken elsewhere. And they very often react on media pressure, because something has, some action has been taken in US or Europe, and they say, what will you be doing? And then if you have very little data in your own database, well, you have very little means of taking your own stand, which is different from the big elephants. But that's what we should aim for. You should be in a position to make independent decisions based on information from your own population. So that's what the indicators are there for, to see, can we get to that position? And then we come to also some indicators that are quite tricky, not associated with regulatory decisions, but what is happening in healthcare. So number of medicine-related hospital admissions per 1,000 admissions. So you need to actually go to the healthcare setting and make a study. We have protocols for this, and unfortunately these studies have primarily been carried out in the most advanced countries. We have lots of these studies from Europe, from United States, from Australia, but very few of them from, say, Asia and Africa. And that's a problem, because then, you can get the impression that there are no problems. If we don't measure problems, we don't see them, they are not there. Actually, there was a recent paper coming out from WHO saying that it appears that you have very few medication errors in low and middle income countries, because they were looking at literature. There was no literature about it. And then they concluded it seems that it's not happening. But of course, reality is that there's no documentation. So that's what we really want to achieve with these questions, with these indicators. Not saying that this is very difficult to measure. It is quite difficult to measure, but reality is difficult to measure in this case. But this is really what we want to achieve with pharmacovigilance. This is what we want to improve. Number of medicine-related deaths per 1,000 persons served by hospital, or number of medicine-related deaths per 100,000 in the population. It's not all that easy, and it's not something you would do continuously. But you should do these kind of measurements from time to time, so that you have some idea of what the burden of drug-related harm is, and also what the trend is. Is it getting better? Is it getting worse? And sorry to say, I have looked at studies since the 1960s, 70s, from the West, from the most advanced countries. And these figures about hospitalized patients, drug-related hospitalizations, have been virtually the same throughout, since the, 30, 40 years back, which you can say that's a failure of pharmacovigilance. We really haven't managed to change that around. But of course, there are very many factors. There are many more medicines being used today than 40 years ago. And also the medicines are much more specific in their actions, and the therapeutic windows are perhaps very narrow today. But still, pharmacotherapy hasn't become safer for patients. And that's really what we want to measure here. A similar indicator here, average cost of treatment, cost issues. When you're talking to politicians, I mean, I'm sorry, but they are not very impressed by number of people harmed. But if we can demonstrate how much it costs to society, and also if we can demonstrate how much we can save by pharmacovigilance and making sure that medicines are being used in the right way for the right patients, that it impresses on them. So that's why these indicators, getting these figures, are really essential. And then average duration of extension of medicine-related hospital stay. So you know normally for the average length of stay for a patient in a hospital, and then if you measure those who have got adverse reactions of some kind, how much will that extend the hospital stay? And that, of course, can also be recalculated into money. Average cost of medicine-related hospitalization. So those are the core outcome and impact indicators. They are, to some extent, difficult to measure, but they are essential for us to be able to know where we are going with pharmacovigilance, if we are successful or not. And here are the core indicators for public health programs. There are 9 of them, and they are a mix of the structure, process, and outcome indicators, but as it applies to public health programs. So do you have in your treatment guidelines for, say, HIV/AIDS, do you have instructions in those guidelines for monitoring the safety of antiretroviral treatment? Until recently, they were normally not there. But I think we have we have had some progress now. So they are coming on board. So do you have an ADR reporting form in the public health program? because they are distributing in the public health program lots of medicines, in many of them. So these indicators are not new to you now, but they apply specifically to a particular public health program. Hope that is clear. Do you want to add anything there?
The important thing is to appreciate the fact that the public health programs, the number of persons involved, the medicines used, and the consequences can be enormous. So you definitely need indicators to keep track of what is happening there. And I think you can find that this is spelled out there, as Sten has already talked about. The very fact that there's that consciousness that pharmacovigilance should be within the program, and then the processes that are going on, which you can capture from 4, and then the outcomes, which I think is very important, which you should follow. If you look at number 8, for instance, number of medicines-related hospital admissions, it tells you if the number of admission is increasing in a program, definitely there's something going on there, which you have to check and intervene. You see, so you must know that all these are flags that can be raised at a point in time. And then number of deaths too. I think those are very, very important issues, within the context of a public health program. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Then just to let you know that in this document, which I have just a printout, a normal printout here, it has a description of the core indicators. So it tells you in the document what is the definition of the indicator, not just the wording that I have read out to you. And what it is, the description, what it is supposed to measure, why it is important, what is the scope of the indicator, and how can the results be interpreted. So that is described for each of the core indicators, not for the complementary indicators. There is a tip saying what are the sources and methods of data collection and indicator calculation. So that is some instructions and assistance for the persons who are collecting and recording the indicators. Main sources, methods of data collection, and how should they be calculated, and also limitations. What is it that we will not measure with this indicator? So I think that's very important to understand and to read for each of the indicators that you're using, so that you will fully understand what they are meant to cover, and in order to have consistency between different evaluators, they should follow the same rules and definitions. And we also have an assessment checklist to help the field workers who are collecting the information. There is the assessment questions, data source used, and the answer, and then proposed next step. You can make a comment on what the country or the facility should be doing. Next step, well, I have already referred to that the publication of version 1.0 by WHO will happen very soon. And then it will go for field testing. To some extent, we have already used it. Both Ambrose and I have been visiting countries and used the set of indicators, and also the collaborating center in Accra has been visiting countries and have used these indicators. We also feel that the indicators can be very helpful for everyone in countries for self-assessment. It can help you to see where your gaps are, where you will get low scores, and perhaps where you need to focus your attention to have a fully fledged system. And we have an idea. We don't know quite when and how we will achieve it, but we would like to have a collection of these self-assessments to begin with, because it would help us enormously, and I think it would help everyone if it was a public document. We have a database with all your self-assessments where you have used the indicators, and then we would also get a feeling for each country where we should and in what way we should support the country. It would be good for country support, for benchmarking, and it would document the general development of global pharmacovigilance if we can use it that way. But it's also to say that this we are deliberately saying this is version 1.0, because on the basis of field testing, we might come to the conclusion that some of the indicators might need to be modified. And also with evolution, we say, well, we don't do things this way anymore, so perhaps we have to have a different kind of indicator. So it's a dynamic process, and they are not there cut in stone once and forever. So we will definitely discuss with our pharmacovigilance centers in what way we should move on to 1.1 or even perhaps 2.0. I also want to, those were the WHO pharmacovigilance indicators, and we can take questions and discuss them later on. I also want to show to you, for completeness, another set of indicators. It's called IPAT, the Indicator-Based Pharmacovigilance Assessment Tool. It's been developed by within the SPS program, supported by USAID and the Organization Management Sciences for Health. They have been driving this, and they have used this indicator in their assessment of pharmacovigilance in some countries. It's an indicator-based performance monitoring tool. It's actually quite similar to the WHO tool. I feel that the outcome and impact part of this set is not as elaborate and is not going as deep as the WHO indicators. This is the way they are showing the result of their assessment, which I kind of like. It's like a spider web, where you have policies, laws and legislation, risk communication and management, risk evaluation and assessment, signal generation and data management, system structure and stakeholder coordination. And then you can kind of put points how well you're scoring in all these axes. And it gives you this picture that this particular country was good on policy, law and regulation, but really poor on risk evaluation and assessment. And then you can compare countries or facilities with this structure. And this is, they have used this tool to assess a large number of countries in the pharmacovigilance systems in Africa. I think there were at least 25 or so in this document, in 46 African countries. The problem with this, when you publish this, I think it was published in 2010 or perhaps 2011, is that once you have done it, development is so quick that the year after or 2 years after, it's already out of date. So I feel personally that these kind of analysis should not be printed. They should be there on the net, and people should continuously update them, because you cannot rely on this. I think it was published in 2011, but the whole assessment was done in 2010, 5 years ago. A lot has happened in 5 years. And they did, they did a similar one in 5 different countries in Asia. Philippines, Cambodia, Nepal, one more, or 2 more. With this, it's very deep, extremely deep analysis that we wouldn't have the capacity to do. But if you're not connecting the analysis with interventions and have a plan for how to go to the next stage, it has, in my view, some limited value.